And thank you for being here. So let's start at the very beginning, because everyone here has something in common, and that is a passion for sports, and I think that applies to everyone in the audience. So we should start at the beginning because that's where things tend to start. So Rick, you were in 3rd grade, and you knew that you were going to go into sports. How did you know that?
Yeah, I was, when you're growing up, you're either number or words. I wasn't numbers, I was words. So I started writing.
Hold it right up.
Books.
Hold it close.
I started doing my own little books when I was in 2nd, 3rd grade. I did have a passion for sports. As a matter of fact, Kevin, one of my senator teammates is here today. Mark Michael, stand up. Former Little League teammate. All right. So I was writing my own little books, and then when I got to high school, we had a very good football team, and I wrote a little paragraph in the church paper on the football team, and I eventually wrote a book about that football team. Then I went to Michigan State, became a sports editor of the student paper, and then right out of college got into UPI, and then the Kansas City Star and Dallas Morning News, and I've covered all the sports. When I got to Dallas, it was strictly football. I became the Cowboy guy, but yeah, I love writing. I still write, and it all started in 3rd grade.
I do think that the passion comes at such an early age, because a lot of the bonding that we have, whether it's with our parents or whether it's with, aunts or uncles, it comes through sports. And Matt, rumor has it that, and I'll tell you, my source is pretty good. Is Mr. Goodman here? Yeah, Dad is in the audience.
This is going great.
You should see, for those you can't see, Mr. Goodman in the back is just making faces. So, according to your dad, you weren't a great student, Matt. That being said,
This is what he told her.
this is what I was told. Not a great student, however, it was just a matter of knowing that you did have the passion for sports. And you also knew that you wanted to be part of the women's basketball team. And it was through that you were able to keep your GPA up.
Well, okay, so.
Please.
Yeah, I'll take it from here, Andy.
Go ahead, Matt.
So, I wasn't a great student, that is true. But one of the ways that I earned extra credit was as a PA announcer for the women's basketball team at Richardson High School. So that is accurate, and since we're starting from the beginning.
That's what we're doing.
All right. So I went to the University of Arkansas to go to school, and I ended up working for the Lady Razorback Athletic Department. And I did play-by-play, color, and sports information, press releases, etc. for women's volleyball, basketball, softball, and soccer, which coincidentally earned me a scholarship. The not-so-great student ended up being on scholarship as a quote-unquote student athlete working for the Lady Razorback Athletic Department.
Your dad is applauding the scholarship part.
Yeah, no surprise there.
Now, when it comes to starting from the beginning, 30 plus years on air. So in other words, you started when you were 10, Scott. Is that right?
10 and a half, yeah.
Where did the passion come from for you?
Well, I tell you what, I'd have to go back to 2nd grade. My best friend, little Frankie, and I were just inseparable, and we went trick-or-treating on the 31st of October, and we played sports, did all kinds of things together. 3 days later, he found out he had leukemia, and 3 days before Christmas, he was gone. And so I vowed at that time I was going to become a pediatrician, and so I was going to find a cure for childhood cancer. So I went to college all those umpteen years later to become a pediatrician, and I was driving down the road when I was 17, I was a freshman in college, and all of a sudden I hear this guy on the radio go, "How would you like to make millions of dollars, travel to millions of locations, meet millions of girls? You too can be a disc jockey." I said, "Gee, that sounds like a pretty good gig." So I pulled in there and applied for that job, never heard. About 2.5 months later, I get a call on the phone and says, "Mr. Murray?" I said, "Yes, do you want me or my father?" He said, "No, I think we want you." And he said, "You applied for that job on the radio?" I said, "Yes, sir, I did." And he said, "Well, we had 517 applicants. We've whittled the list down to 18. You're one of the 18. Are you still interested?" I said, "Oh, yes, sir, I sure am." Well, long story short, I ended up getting the job. So my freshman and sophomore years in college, I worked from 1 till 6 in the morning doing what I was going to be a doctor, so I called myself Doc Scott, the sound surgeon. And so did that, and then they Scott, the sound surgeon, and had the call letters for the station. And the GM at the CBS affiliate, the television affiliate, called me and asked me if I'd ever done television. I said, no, sir, I hadn't. He said, well, he said, you look like my babyface paper boy, but if I you know, you want to do some commercials? And I said, sure. So I started doing some TV commercials when I was 18, 19 years old. And then he called me in one day and pulled out a little fake mustache and said, put this on. And he said, I don't, you know, like I said, you look like my babyface paper boy. He said, you'd be a great news anchor. And I said, oh, he said, you got the look and the voice. And I said, well, I'm honored, Mike, but I said, I really don't want to cover blood and guts. I want to be a doctor. And he said, I said, but if you got a job in sports, I said, my dad and I are two of the biggest sports fans on the face of the earth. And I said, I'd love that. So he hooked me up with the news director. They liked the way I wrote. I had a minor in English, and they let me go out and do 4 or 5 stories on the air when I was still in school. And then I was about 15 days away from going to Duke, the medical school, after I'd gotten out of college. And I got a call on the hotline, the bat phone, as they called it. It started flashing, and it was the news director, or the general manager said, Jim just fired Eddie. Eddie was the sports anchor. Jim was the news director, and they got into a shouting match in the newsroom, and he didn't have a sports anchor for the early and late news. So I tore into the station, did the early and late news. The rest is history. They offered me a job, and I never went to Duke, the medical school. So that was how I got into television, and my dad had always taught me about learning through life. I won't take the time right now, but if we have time later, I'll tell you a little acronym that my dad shared with me that to this day taught me about life, about sports, and about just being the very best you can be.
See, I think that's so well put, because there are so many parallels and so many lessons as far as when it comes to sports and when it comes to life lessons. And I can remember for me growing up, every life lesson was taught in a sports metaphor from my dad. So it was always in baseball metaphors, and everything it was about, whether it was taking the pitch, taking your time with the pitch, or not, slowing down the game, and everything was always taught in that manner. And I feel like when it comes, it's sort of how you start thinking. Now, Rick, I know you think in terms of a writer. So when you're listening to what Scott has to say, and I feel like you're writing the story, but one thing that I thought was so interesting that we had spoken up previously about was that it's not that you're a fan of the Cowboys or a fan of the team that you're covering. You're a fan of the good story, bottom line.
Yeah, I've covered so many teams over the years. I covered the Giants when I was in New York, and I covered the Chiefs in Kansas City, and I covered the Cowboys here. And then for 20 years, I covered the NFL in general. So every week, I went to the best game in the NFL, not Cowboy related. So I got to know everybody in football, the Parcells, the Belichicks, and the Harbaughs, and Mike Tomlin, Bill Cowher, people like that, Tony Dungy. So I have friends on every team. So I wasn't going to cheer for any one team. I'm cheering for the good story. And when you cover football, every week it's a different story. You never see the same game twice. That's one thing I love about sports. It's not repetitious. Every day is a new day. And even when I was covering the Cowboys on the beat, every time I walked into the building, it was my job to find a story. And I told myself, there are 25 stories out there today. Go find the best one. And that's, how you operate. It's new every day. You meet new people every day. It drives you. It invigorates you. It keeps you young. And that's been the fun part of the job that I've had.
You talk about meeting different people every day and all different kinds of people, whether it's a Bill Parcells or whether it's even just a fan. And for Matt, you deal a lot with that. And it's, I think even though your job isn't necessarily to tell the story like everyone else on the panel, your job is to tell a story about your team to in some way make it accessible, make it something that people want to be a part of, and also in some ways build bridges through sports. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Well, we always have said that we're in the memories business. Right? Our goal as operators have to think about all 15,000, 20,000, 80,000 people that are coming to our venue, and what does that driveway to driveway experience look like? because people are spending their well-earned dollars from an entertainment perspective to disconnect from their day-to-day tribulations of their life to come root for their team, right? Root for the experience, whatever it is. And I've been super fortunate to, whether it's the Dallas Cowboys, whether it's the Mavericks, going all across the country at NBA teams, to see how everybody thinks about the fan. That's the business that we're in. At the end of the day, if we're not providing a world-class fan experience, then we're doing something wrong. And I think the way that we've always, I mean, from the day I started my career at the Frisco Rough Riders minor league ballpark up the road, and we used to talk about we bottle and sell happiness, right?
You would sell tickets, right? That's
Correct.
what you were doing
That's
early
right.
on, as essentially as a kid.
Kid is relative, but yeah, it was. That's exactly what we did. But we would meet with small, medium-sized businesses, and we would talk to them about how they were entertaining their customers, right? Whether they were taking people to lunch or whether they were playing golf, we were providing them an opportunity to bring their customers to the ballpark, where we would then tailor a custom experience, take them down on the field before the game, bring balls to them in the seats if they brought their kids with them, and give them a behind-the-scenes kind of look and feel to create a memory, right? And that memory was always attributed with the person that brought them to the game, right? So it was a business development tool that we packaged as baseball tickets.
So how has big money changed the field and the industry?
I mean, it all it has done is given a better experience to fans, right? It's, if you think about, for those who went to Texas Stadium, when you went to Cowboys games for the first 30 years they existed here, and then you think about the new AT&T Stadium, everything about it is an elevated premium experience, right? And that's a function of the TV dollars are bigger, the revenue is bigger, the player salaries are bigger. All that leads to, you have to create a bigger and better fan experience to command bigger and better dollars, right? But at the same time, the suite that you buy today at Texas Stadium is a much different experience than it was at the old Texas Stadium, right? I mean, they didn't put Louis Vuitton leather in the suites back then, and they do now. And I think that same principle kind of applies, but it's all a function of just the economics of sports, because now it's the only live thing that you can watch that's appointment viewing.
Absolutely, and that's so true. And also what you said as far as the players and their salaries, and now their ability to sort of monetize their own intellectual property. And Scott, when it comes to something along the lines of change, because, you know, Matt, you mentioned it's only elevated, but how much have things changed since when you first started several decades ago?
Wow. A lot. And I don't know that it's all been in the way it should be, in the most positive way.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I just, I think, I don't know, just the way we do things and the way we report things. Of course, you got to remember, when I came here, ESPN was just about a year old, and so there was no Fox at the time. ESPN was, you know, what is that? Most people didn't, you know, you got ESPN, what'd you say? And they had no idea what it was. So we used to get, on a 10 o'clock newscast, we'd get 5 or 6 minutes to tell the sports. And that's before the news went to 10:35. It used to be just a solid half hour. So, you know, whether it get, 3 minutes, sports would get twice that. And it's much different now. You watch the sportscast now, they, everybody can get their sports report right on this little thing
I disagree.
during the course of the time.
I beg to differ on that.
Oh, okay. Well, I forgot you're still on the air now, but I mean, really, it's.
By the way, my business, that's called shade, but go on.
Well, it's just much different than it used to be. And I used to enjoy doing feature stories too, where it would tell something, where you had a chance to do what Rick did. It wasn't just telling, facts. You could go into into a little more depth on someone, how, what made them special or something. You just don't have the time to do that. I remember when I started my Sports Extra program, that was the reason I was working at NBC in Washington, D.C. And I came down here, and Dale Hansen had been here about 6 months at Channel 4, and Vern Lundquist was at Channel 8, and I needed to do something that would kind of set myself apart. Well, I was doing a show in Washington, and I came down and I said, can I do a sports show? And they said, nobody's going to watch a sports show on a Sunday night. And I said, you don't think so? And they said, no, there's no way. I I said, what do you run now? They said, reruns of Perry Mason, and we're number 1 in the ratings. I said, are you serious? And the news at the time went from 10 to 10:20. So I said, okay. So, you know, I said, we'll put this Scott Murray Sports Extra on for 10 weeks, see what happens. At the end of 10 weeks, it was number 3 in the ratings. They said, we'll leave it on to the end of the football season. It became number 1. It was number 1. And then Dale Hansen went to Channel 8 in 1983, and the first thing he wanted to do was do a Sunday night. So Dale Hansen's Sports Special was born. So, and Mike Ducey, you see what he does on Channel 4 now on Fox. So I didn't mean to take so long to answer your question, but it's just the dynamics of it have really, really changed.
I think the one constant that we'd all agree on is the fact that it is storytelling. It is about not just the players and the games, but
not just the scores.
Not just the scores, but it's about why should we root for the players. And to get back to the story concept, Rick, I think it also is about delving deeper and understanding the players. Now, one thing that has certainly changed is that players have a voice now for a lot more than just sports. They're talking about social issues. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, they've always had a voice. I go back, Jim Brown in the 60s, Muhammad Ali, Cassius Clay in the 60s, John Carlos, 68 Olympics. There was, back then, they had a political forum of which to speak.
Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is a great
Yeah,
example.
exactly. And I think that as the athletes, as sports has become, it's exploded. And athletes are now celebrities. You know, back in the day, you know, you grew up in Kansas City or Detroit, and they were your athletes. But now they're America's athletes. Aaron Rodgers is a national player. Dak Prescott's a national player. They've got a much larger platform now, and they use it. And a lot of times they use it for branding. But they have a forum for whatever social issue of the day is, and they're asked the questions. They're going to give you answers. And more journalists have become more probing and want to know how you feel about the pride movement and transgender and all that. There's a forum there, and they're going to use it, and that's just going to increase their exposure and their opinions on topics beyond the realm of sports.
And I think that's what makes it interesting. I think that makes it so much, in some ways, easier to relate to the game and kind of a closer connection to the game. If you're able to root for the athlete, if you understand who they are at their core. Now, I know that you've had a lot of interactions and gotten to know some of the guys on the Mavs and so on and so forth. Tell us something that stays in your mind about some of the players that you've experienced and had connections with.
I mean, first and foremost is that they're people first. And I think that's the challenge that a lot of these athletes deal with. And I think the difference is you look at basketball players and they don't blend in anywhere.
Right.
Right? Hockey players, they could be sitting out here right now, we wouldn't know. You know, we used to hear Adam Silver, the commissioner of the NBA, used to talk about the thing about the NBA players is it's the only sport where you sit as close as you can to the athletes in action. They wear tank tops and shorts, no hat, no helmet, no headgear, no nothing. So there's a level of exposure there in that they're that close to the fan, and they're just wearing t-shirts and shorts, and they're 7 feet tall. So when you start talking to them like regular people, all of a sudden you're having a much different type of conversation because they can be very guarded. And I think one of the things that we talk about a lot at the Mavs is how do we make the players feel like they're part of the family? Because especially to Rick's point, in the way that players feel today, they have teams around them, they feel insulated. Some of them like to insulate themselves, but at the end of the day, they have to realize that they're part of a community asset, right? They work for a team that belongs to the fans. So one of the things that we spend a lot of time on is helping them understand how important that connection is, how important the community initiatives are, dealing with kids, working at the camps, working with sponsors. Even though they don't love it, we try and help bring them along and help them understand the value of it. So that's.
Has there been a particular player that you have felt connected with? I've gotten to know some of the players on the Mavs and had a few encounters with Mark Cuban. Anything you want to share with us? Because I'm always fascinated by other people's interactions, other people's perspectives, and it helps people either root for people. That's how I, similar to something you had said, it's not about rooting for necessarily just the team, but individuals, and that's what makes it something that you're invested in. So
It's not a Mavs example,
okay.
but I for those who are familiar with Live Golf, I do have some working knowledge of that, as I was there
6 months?
I was there for 6 months. But I got to work very closely with Brooks Koepka. And prior to working with him, I didn't love him as a player, right? He had a bit of a bravado, a bit of a thing about him. You watch him on TV, and I'm like, this guy seems like a little bit of a jerk. I got to work with him. I sat in meetings with him. We sat next week. We conversed. Remembered every detail of every meeting. Was laser focused on the business at hand, which was, at this point trying to build a brand around him and his team. And I was remarkably impressed with his business acumen and how friendly he was. Like, who he is who he is. It's still like, that's still there. But he was really authentic. And then he wins the PGA Championship recently, and I find myself at home rooting for him. My wife's like, I thought you hated this guy. I'm like, no, I came to love him. So.
And I want to follow up with that with you, Scott. But before you hand the mic over, Live Golf, I've got to ask you your thoughts, having spent a little time there. I can't not ask you about this, the merger. Your thoughts, Matt?
It's great for golf. I will say, the fact of the matter is, we talked about it was clearly a very disruptive enterprise that was covered in controversy. The players won. The players make more money. The fans got to watch more golf. It led the story, and at least in the sports business trades, it was the lead story. So it brought golf to the forefront. And what comes to pass with this new merger is yet to be known. But I think what we saw when we were putting on the events, the goal was to create a different type of golf experience that catered to families, that catered to kids, that catered to younger people who were more interested in a faster pace with music and fan activation and experiential assets. And that's what we did, and it was great. To see it live was really fun. And now I think the tour probably realized that they had a product that they were competing against that brought in a much younger demographic, because you would come to those Live Golf events and they were full of families. So that's who
the
it is.
players. I think that's often the case, because if the players aren't happy, then they're not going to perform, and if they can't perform, the fans aren't going to be happy. So it's all it all affects each other. And I do always, that is a fascination, is getting to know what the players are like and who they are truly as humans. And Scott, can you give me an example of a player who absolutely changed, you had a different perception than when you actually met them?
Oh gosh, that's a tough question. People often ask me who are the most incredible athletes you've ever met. I like the ones that were great athletes, but are greater human beings. And obviously, Roger Staubach is the first one that comes to mind. I've known Roger for, since he called it quits in football. But and he and Mary Ann, his wife, and their kids, he's just a solid citizen. Byron Nelson was a dear friend. I was with Byron and Peggy at their home 2 weeks before he passed away. I got a chance to meet my mother's from Alabama, and when I was in 5th grade, my mother told me when we were at the lake, at a cottage at the lake every summer, from now on I was going to have to read 1 or 2 books every summer. The first one she gave me was a book on Jesse Owens, and then Jesse Owens, because she had been from Alabama and she saw what had gone on as a youngster, and then he went to Ohio to live with his grandmother, and then set some records, and ends up in high school, ends up going to Ohio State, sets more records, and he gets to Ohio State not on an athletic scholarship, but he went to Ohio State on an academic scholarship, and then went to the Olympics, and in '36 won 4 gold medals, first American to do so in the same games, and yet Hitler didn't give him the medals because he was black. You're Jewish, you're black, you're whatever. You're a minority. I don't want anything to do with you. And so that lasted, and I'm just telling you one of the stories of that very quickly, but it was impactful to me. 15 years later, in 1951, he still didn't have his medals. Picture an athlete today not getting their medals. Boy, it'd be on the front page of every newspaper in America. But the Harlem Globetrotters called him and said, hey, we're going to Berlin Stadium, 80,000 strong. You were there 15 years ago. You want to go with us? So he said, I'd love to. So they didn't tell anybody they were going to do that. Off they go to Berlin, and Jesse is there. The Globetrotters get out of this helicopter. Everybody stands and waves, and here's 80,000 strong, all these Germans, you know, after World War II. And nothing happened. Then they said, we have a guest for you. And all of a sudden, Jesse Owens shows up. And the crowd went bonkers. They loved it. Well, at the end of the game, he's up, Konrad Adenauer was the chancellor at that time. And Konrad Adenauer said to Jesse, as he turned to Jesse, he said, Jesse, we can't thank you enough for coming to Germany with the Globetrotters, but I would like to say something. 15 years ago, the dictator of this company did not extend one-hand congratulations to you. You are a true champion. He said, with these 80,000 people here from Germany and the entire country, I extend two hands of congratulations to a true champion. Well, now fast forward, I read this story and knew all about this. I am first in television. I'm just a punk kid. I'm, just 20 years old, and I find out that he's coming to speak at this school, and I'm the MC of the commencement exercise. Well, I was just ecstatic. So this is back in the day before we had videotape, and all of a sudden I get this, I guess we did have videotape. We didn't have film, and so I got this old film of him, and got it on the air. I thought I'd get an interview with Jesse Owens. Called my folks, called my mother, and told her, and boom. How special was this? One of the highlights of my entire career. So I go to meet him, and he could not have been kinder. Well, the next year, I've asked to MC this thing. I don't know who the speaker is, and I'm walking across the parking lot, and this guy goes, Scott! And I look up, and I go, who is it? And I look up, I said, oh my gosh, it's Jesse Owens. He said, Mr. Owens. No, not Mr. Owens, it's Jesse. We're friends, Scott, remember? Well, he comes in, he does his thing, does his speech, and at the end gives me his address. And so I write him some notes back and forth, and he'd go back and forth. He passes away, I think it was like 1979, 1980, and I have a note to this day from his wife who thanked me for being so kind to him in the latter portion of his life. You have no idea what it meant to him. Well, that's unbelievable. That's one of the highlights of my, and about 2 weeks later, I went to the Olympics in 1980 at Lake Placid, and I was at the game, Miracle on Ice. I was at that game. So then, in all the things that my dad had taught me about sports and what I could learn about life, suddenly were all becoming true. My mother told me about Jesse Owens. My father was from Nova Scotia. He loved hockey. He said, you got to be at that game, and I was, covering that game. So I learned so much about life through sports because of my mom and dad.
His stories, I feel like each one of you could write a book about what you've experienced. Rick, best life lesson you've learned through sports. I love, by the way, that reaction. I enjoyed it.
Well, there's a winner and loser every game. And not everybody wins every single time. And I think you learn how to lose. I mean, that's what sports teach you. You learn, you can have your high moments, but you got to find a way to get through the low moments. And that's a great thing about sports. I appreciate players that are there and coaches, owners that are there every day that aren't hiding out.
From the media, you mean?
From the media. And Jerry Jones has the thickest skin of anybody I've ever dealt with. You can say whatever you want about Jerry Jones. His philosophy is say whatever you want, just spell Cowboys right in the headline. So the anecdotal story with me and Jerry is back in 1992, after the Cowboys won or 93, after they won their second Super Bowl, Jerry wasn't happy with the way things were going with Jimmy. Jimmy's getting all the credit after Jerry took all the abuse. So we were in Orlando at the NFL owners meetings, and Ed Ward and myself, Morning News, and we were with Jerry Jones till 5 in the morning in the bar, and he was going through how important is a franchise quarterback to winning a championship. We went through Aikman. How important is a franchise running back? Emmitt Smith. We spent time talking about Emmitt. Franchise wide receiver, Michael Irvin. Talked about Michael. So how about a coach? And then he dropped the famous line, there are 500 coaches that could have done what Jimmy Johnson did. Now, 95% of the people in sports would have backed off the next day and said, I was misquoted, that I was drunk, I was whatever. Jerry Jones never backed off. Jerry Jones stood behind what he said to us. And later, and we got all kinds of abuse in town for reporting that story. Later, he thanked Ward and I for how we handled that story. I got the highest regard for Jerry Jones for that reason. He's amazing. He says something, he stands behind it.
In some ways, I feel like that's probably served him. He is unabashedly himself. He is not afraid of a headline, whether it's good or bad, as long as people are talking about it. As long as people are talking about it. I do like that lesson, learning how to lose. What was an example of the time you've taken the L, Matt, and how did you cope with that?
I mean, it's probably the place I was right before the Mavs when I was at Live Golf. I mean, you know, it was a risky proposition. I had just been the chief operating officer for NYCFC. We won an MLS Cup, working for a soccer team in New York City that was owned by the biggest kind of soccer conglomerate in the world, the City Football Group, that also owns Manchester City and 11 other teams. But I was really interested in golf. I'd never worked in golf. So I took a chance. And it didn't take long for me to realize that it wasn't the right place for any number of reasons.
How did you know that? What was it about it?
There were enough signs around that told me, having been around the business side long enough, I knew it was not the right place for me.
Okay.
And so, while it's an L, because I made the decision I was going to find my happiness elsewhere, but you learn from those exercises, right? Like I took the chance. We took a run, but at the end of the day, I was like, this does not fill my bucket, right? I don't like some of the things I see. Doesn't fill my bucket. I'm going to find my happiness elsewhere, and that was hard in and of itself because I felt like I had made really good decisions my entire career up until that. Now, in retrospect, there was a lot to learn. Like, I learned a lot, I saw a lot, I made a bunch of great relationships. That would be the one that I would still think about doing over a second time.
And I think that everyone needs to have something like that. Everyone needs to have something in their life that it doesn't go quite right, because you're able to redirect, and those lessons as you're redirecting, that often builds a foundation for who you become. Scott, for so long, your identity has been about being on TV and being that guy, and being the sports anchor. And now you've redirected to focusing on the community and reaching out and kind of putting those two worlds together, which brings us to, again, the theme of tonight, which is building bridges through sports. And there really is this great parallel between sports and community. Talk to me a little about that.
Well, I just mentioned a minute ago about my parents. I lost my mom last year, and I lost my dad about 10 years ago, but I still have them in my life day to day because I remember all the things that they taught me. My dad, when we'd be out in the backyard throwing the football around, if I dropped it, he'd go, it's all right. I'd get frustrated. He'd say, pick it up because you can. Come on, you're going to get it because you can. And I taught my own son that. Because you can, it's all right. There's always, and my dad, he said, you like sports? I said, yeah. He said, well, let's hear. Sports is just like life. And so we put together this acronym that starts with the S in sports. That stands for strength. That's who you are. Everything you do in your life, you have to be strong. You have to have the strength. So you move forward. Now you get from the S to the P is the next one. Okay. You got a passion for something, but you got to work hard at it. It can't be your vision, your goal, your dream, your desire. That passion has got to. So passion. So these are all words that start with P that we have: passion, preparation, perseverance, staying positive, productive, professional. Because all those things will allow you to get someday your purpose, who you are, and what you're all about. So SP, and then you get to the O. Outstanding. Okay, that's what you want to be. You want to be outstanding every day. So you work hard at it, okay? SBO, R, the responsibility, and the one word that my parents taught me more than anything, respect. Gotta have respect. You're in business, you have to have respect. If you're the boss, Your employees have to respect you. If you're not, the company has to respect you. It's a one-way, it's a two-way street, respect. Then you get to, what's next? Oh, T, the trifecta. The trifecta. 3 words that all start with letter T. Truthful, trustworthy, transparent. That's the kind of person you want to surround yourself with, and that's the kind of person you have to be every single day. And then you get to the last one. He said, this is what you strive for. Success. All those things put together is your success. You have to be the smartest one, so you have the greatest success. And it doesn't matter what I've done in my life, that's what I've tried to do. We were listening to Rick, who I have the utmost respect for, because everything he shared with you, he is different than a lot of reporters that I knew and a lot of columnists. And he just was always...
How so?
I always, again, this is a reader, I don't see Rick a lot, but I just always have respect for him because I thought he told the story, but I always thought he did it in a positive, productive way with great credibility. And that's key. You have to have the credibility. And the credibility is, that's what allows us to all have the believability. Okay? So when you know that Rick's there, okay, you pick up the morning news, you know what he's going to write is going to be legitimate.
I think ultimately you trusted your gut, you knew this was the right direction to go. I think that the gut usually knows more than the brain sometimes. Can you give me an example of that, Rick?
Okay, I'm in Kansas City in '89, and I knew Jimmy Johnson and his staff at Oklahoma State. The assistant coaches, Dave Watts, Tony Wise, Butch Davis. And through the course of my career, I would keep in contact with people that I met. And there were a couple of coaches. I would check in once a year, that once I would go to Southern Cal and Wise would go to Syracuse, just wherever they were, just check and see how they're doing. So it was October, and I called up one of the assistant coaches, and just out of the blue, just making a courtesy call, says, how you doing? He says, you never guess what we're doing today. I says, what? He says, we're trading Herschel Walker. And he gave me all the details. He gave me the players involved, and he gave me the draft picks involved. So I'm in Kansas City, and we got a PM paper. So I write the story in the Kansas City Star that the Cowboys trade Herschel Walker. It was an anonymous source. The source, of course, wasn't Pepper. They wouldn't run it because it was an anonymous source. So I called at 6 o'clock. I said, where did you play the Walker trade? And they said, we didn't run it. It was an anonymous source. I said, the source was impeccable. And of course, the next morning, everybody in the world everybody in the world had a different player tied to it. And when you went back to my story, it was the 7 players that were involved in the 7 draft picks. I was given that because my gut run it. And I had that story, but never got credit for it because my paper didn't have the guts to run it. And that's when I decided, something? If they don't have the guts to run the story, I can't work for this paper. The next year I went to work for the Dallas Morning News. The Morning News called me because of my relationship with Jimmy and that staff. I walked into the building, never having spent a day in Dallas in my life with better sources than the 2 guys who had been on the beat the previous year. So but my gut told me, Kansas City Star, if they don't have the guts to run the story, I can't work for these people.
I mean, that's Dallas's gain right there. Casey's loss. I have to ask you about the Cowboys. I can't have you sit here and not ask you. I was talking to a player who was in studio about last week, Jake Ferguson, and I said, okay, so what is it about your team? Why do you think that, because you hear all the, we love each other, we're great in the locker room, they've got so much talent on this team. And I said, why do you guys think that you haven't been able to win a ring in so many years? And his answer was careful, right, as it should be, which is it's the NFL, you're competing against some of the biggest talent that there is, and that's why. Why do you think that the Cowboys haven't been able to win a Super Bowl in so long?
Kansas City has Patrick Mahomes, and no one else does. The Cowboys had Roger Staubach, and no one else did. The Cowboys had Troy Aikman, no one else did. When you get that guy, you win. And I'm not sure Dak is that guy. And until you get that franchise quarterback, until you get what the Packers had with Favre, and what the Steelers had with Bradshaw, and the Packers had with Bart Starr, until you get that guy, you can get there. But you need the quarterback to win it when you get there. It's Peyton Manning, it's Tom Brady. You get that guy, you're going to win Super Bowls. I think until the Cowboys get that guy, I don't see him winning another Super Bowl.
Interesting. I think that brings me to you, Matt.
I'm sitting between royalty here with the stories. I got nothing.
I mean, how about a championship for the Mavs, right? I mean, we're talking about why the Cowboys. I think it's time to see a parade here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Is it going to happen with the Mavs anytime soon? And is Luka the guy to make it happen?
I mean, I can't speak to the former in terms of when it happens, but you look at generational superstars, and Luka Doncic is 100% the real deal. And I can say that in my time at the NBA, I had the opportunity to go see his very first NBA game. I was in Phoenix. Luka's on the road as a rookie, first game in the NBA. And he's out on the court like and he had, because he played so long in the Euro leagues as a professional. But he's on the court in his first NBA game, and he is as calm and sees the floor as any player I've ever seen. And so there aren't many talents like Luka Doncic. So to Rick's point, you have to have that number one player to get you to the promised land. We got the player.
So, Scott, which team do you think is going to win? What's the next team that we're going to see win a championship here in the area?
Well, that's a loaded question.
It's a one-word answer.
What Rick said was right. You got to have that quarterback, and I don't know. Boy, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to believe. It's been over 25 years since the Cowboys were in the Super Bowl. I mean, that's crazy. But I don't know. I'd like to think the Cowboys.
I heard
Well,
someone say stars out
I
there.
don't want the Cowboys more, but I
That's
Well,
fine.
you know,
I appreciate that.
I'd be happy. Gee, the way the Rangers started off this year, I never saw them play baseball like that in my entire life. Holy cow! It takes us back to the Nolan Ryan days. But I'd be happy. I think it's just great for the city, whether it's the Stars, whether it's the Rangers, Mavericks, Cowboys. It's good. It brings sports. And you're playing off what our theme is here tonight. Sports, helps us all. You feel better. You want to be a part of it. It's just what it is. I'm on the board of the National Football Foundation, the Gridiron Club of Dallas, and it's fun to be involved and see some of the stuff that goes on there. Done the MC the Davey O'Brien National Quarterback Award since 1989 when Troy won it. I've done the Doug Walker National Running Back Award since it started, 1990. I enjoyed it. I created the Jason Witten Collegiate Man of the Year Award in 2017. I remember going to Jason and saying, hey, I know your history, I know what you've gone through and what you battled through as a child with all your abuse with your dad and what have you, and yet you've handled yourself like I think, Rick's going to know this a heck of a lot better than I am, but I would imagine he's going to be in the Pro Football Hall of Fame sometime. My son and I were involved. Did you all happen to see that movie that was on the night before the Super Bowl called The Perfect 10? That was about 10 players. There's only 10 players in the history of the game that have won a Heisman Trophy and then gone on to the NFL and eventually been inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And so my son and I was my business partner. My son and I and 4 other people. One of them being Tim Brown, who was he represented the players, but he was the wide receiver from Woodrow Wilson High School and played with the Raiders, and then he's in the Pro Football Hall of Fame and won the Heisman in 1987. But he's but there's only 10 players. Staubach and Tony Dorsett are 2 of the Dallas Cowboys that are a part of that. But and O.J. Simpson was part of it too. The other players didn't want to deal with that because of his past. But we put this thing together called The Perfect 10, and that's kind of playing off the same thing. It's good. Any way we can bring sports into our life, I think we all benefit. I really, really do.
So on that note, to sort of wrap things up, if you could each answer the question, Scott, why don't we start with you? The future of sports, what does that look like?
Boy, how long is this show? We're going to be here till the 1st of July. Huh? Oh, gosh. The future of sports?
Yeah, what does the future of sports look like in your opinion?
Well, it's certainly, I mean, you know, you think back to 1987 when SMU got the death penalty for supposedly paying a player. Now look at what's going, you know, taking place in college football. I'd be actually interested to hear what Rick has to say about that, because he covers this a heck of a lot more than I do now. But you know, just I don't know. I just wish people could be more positive. You know, it's like my Leadership America speech that I give: creating champions of change through a culture of civility. People are not kind, courteous, and respectful anymore, and that's what I want. I'd like to see more players that are. I might be dreaming, but I'd like to be able to say to my, you know, to my grandchildren, you know, I'm about to be a grandfather in 2 months. Have not been part of that. Yeah, but I'd like to be able to tell him someday, you know, look up to that guy. Sure, he's a great ball player, but he's a good guy too. I want guys with integrity and, you know, just role models for the real reason they should be role models, because they're, you know, and that's why I created that Jason Witten Collegiate Man of the Year Award. What he did on the field, but what he represents off the field as well.
So, final question to you. What is the future of sports right now?
Okay, I think pro sports is pricing the average fan out of the game. And I think you look at the Super Bowl ticket now, it's $5,000 a ticket. I mean, back 20 years ago, 30 years ago, if your team went to the Super Bowl, father would take his son. Right now, that's at $10,000. Just walk in the building. Forget the rental car. Forget the hotel. I think pro sports. They always talk about it's about the fans. It's not about the fans. It's about the money. I think what's going to happen down the road. I think it's become. This is what Pete Rozelle always feared, that football would become a studio game. I think that's what's going to happen. I think you're going to be able to watch any sport, any team, buy the game individually at home with the big screen. I think you're going to see smaller stadiums, smaller crowds, and I think you're going to be able to follow your team with a pay TV element, essentially. Because like I said, you go to the Cowboy game, you're paying what, $100 to park. It's going to cost you $400 for a ticket. It's just, they are pricing the average fan. It's great, you know, talk about the suites, and that's great for the elite fan. But the average fan can't afford pro sports. And I think pro sports is forgotten, right?
I feel like you've got some support in the audience. Matt.
Yeah, this is great. I'm like the antagonist of this process. This is phenomenal. You're not wrong, Rick. I mean, the fact of the matter, and it's funny you said that, because those of us on the business side have long talked about the notion of smaller venue, right? The technology today facilitates arguably a better experience watching it at home. Right? I mean, you look, Apple just released a $4,000 set of goggles the other day that, you know, will likely have a material impact on how you watch games at home. So I do think there's legitimacy to that, and the way that TV is going in terms of live sports and your ability to buy whatever game you want and watch whatever team you're a fan of, you can get access to it. You can watch it in high definition at home in crystal clarity. Now, that being said, I will staunchly disagree with your take on how we treat the fans.
What are your ticket prices?
Our ticket prices are directly in the middle of the NBA average. We are 17th in the league.
What's the average price?
The average ticket price of an NBA game is $100.
That's my point.
So, but it is
family of $400 walking the building.
100%. That is
Parking,
accurate.
concessions. It gets pricey for the guy who's working the line at Chrysler or Ford, or the guys delivering mail, or you know, driving a truck. Just the average fan. My point is the average fan has been priced out. You're always going to have the top shelf guys who are going to buy the suites. You're going to have the luxury, but the average fan is going to buy a big screen TV. He's going to sit on the couch and not have to pay for parking, not have to pay for beer, not have to pay for a hot dog. And he's going to enjoy it that way. I just think.
I don't disagree with you, but I think it makes it that much more special when that fan does make the decision to come to a game. When they want to come. And the Mavericks, as an example, right? We maintain a broad swath of tickets in the arena that are very accessibly priced. And a lot of teams in this league, in our league and all the other leagues, think about a percentage of their capacity to make sure that games are accessible. Because we all have to compete with watching games on TV. And that's why we have to make, when they do come to the game, we have to make it a perfect experience, right? Now, the economics of the business are different today than they used to be then. So there's some validity to your point, but I think at the end of the day, we have to maintain an exceptional experience for every type of fan, from the top of the building to the bottom of the building. And we have to think about the broadcast of that game to make sure that those that are consuming the majority of it on television are seeing an exceptional experience also. Because at the end of the day, fans are fans. Whether they're coming live or watching it at home on TV, we need the fans to be talking about it, to be competing in youth sports, to keep the perpetuation of it all going.
And I think that, just to go off of that, the future of sports may very well be more events like this one, where everyone here may have different opinions and may have come from a completely different perspective, but we all have one unifying thing, and that is sports. Our passion for sports, our understanding of sports, our wanting to understand sports more. And I just want to thank everyone here for being here. We appreciate your time. I hope you can tune in tonight on CBS. CBS Texas, 9 or 10. Thank you to everyone for being here. And Kevin, I'm going to hand the mic over to you.
Let me jump in here and say, and how about a nice hand for Andy? Didn't you do a great job?
We promised to get you out by 7:45 because you have to get back to Fort Worth, I think.
I'm good with time.
Yes,
It's exactly
okay.
7:45. Yeah.
Thank you to this panel. This was wonderful. This was just excellent, and some good, strong opinions out there. And we've asked them if you have time, if you can stay. We're going to have about 10 minutes more of handing out grants and things like that, if you can stay just for people to talk with you a little bit, except for you. Yeah. So thank you much. And I'm going to introduce Susan, who's our executive director, and she is going to carry the